fill that position.
Okay, so we will not continue to wait for Will then if he is not going to be joining us this
No,
evening.
we shouldn't do that.
It would be staff's recommendation to not wait for Will.
Okay, I've actually been on this committee, I think, as long as Will's has, so I'm not quite sure what to do now. Do we know if Eric is going to join us this evening?
I haven't heard. I don't know if anybody else has had.
Okay.
No.
All right. Well, it's 7:02, so why don't we go ahead and call the meeting to order? And the first order of business is to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. And I think, Jennifer, was there a flag I saw? There is. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so we got the very last part of that recorded. So the operational tasks, hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at the agenda and the minutes from last month. Well, actually not last month, it's been, what, June? So it's been quite a while. Jennifer did send those out. Are there any adjustments, comments, or changes to the minutes? I see Eric joining us now. All right. Seeing none, we will go ahead and accept those as submitted. And the next order of business was the proposed budget committee meeting calendar, and Director Allen, I think, was going to present that.
Yes, you. Okay. So you have in your packet the proposed calendar that we worked through with the school board, but it is ultimately up to this committee to establish that calendar. So it is put before you as a proposal this evening.
Good evening, Eric. All right, I am actually looking in the packet and it is not part of the PDF, but perhaps I'm missing it.
Well, that would be unfortunate. So we won't ask you to act on that. We will look for that PDF and we'll move on and come and circle back around to that.
Okay. Yeah, the board meeting times for December through March are on the agenda, but I did not see the proposed budget committee times. So my apologies for not catching that earlier. Next thing on the agenda was the meeting and ending times, if necessary. I believe we are a standard meeting of 7 to 9 p.m. I don't anticipate it's going past that this evening. If we do need to, we'll use the traditional process, unless people have an objection to it, where we make a motion for an additional 15 minutes of time. So unless anybody's opposed to that process for extended meeting times, okay. So we are actually a little ahead of schedule and moving on to the financial update. And Director Allen, it's back to you.
Thank you. I am not looking forward to doing this over Zoom, but we will do our best. I am not seeing, oh, there it is. Okay, I found it. It's going to take me just a second here. Fortunately, I had this set up for Google Meets, but apparently it was not set up for, there we go.
Hey, Melissa, you'd be happy to know our meetings are a little shorter. The Western Oregon University right now started at 1 o'clock and it's still going for their board meeting.
I am happy to know that because I do need to share that during our break Monday night, I went out to my husband and said, I will not be in bed till after 11 o'clock. And then 45 minutes later, we were done. I was so proud of you guys.
So I would ask what people are seeing on their screen. Oh, good. Okay.
Some coins.
I wish I had more of those.
Lots of money.
Thank you. All right. Well, I apologize for the hiccup there. I thought I was set up, but apparently I was set up for Google Meets and not for Zoom. So again, I'm not looking forward to doing this over Zoom. And I know that it can be difficult sometimes to follow with a shared screen. So you won't see a lot of the animations and that type of thing. Because I just want to make sure that everybody gets the information. Also keeping it maybe a little simpler this evening, maybe a little bit higher level. And the reason for that is forecasts rely significantly on what has gone before. And we are in truly unprecedented times. And so that's making my life very difficult. But what you have before you is my best estimates and my best forecasts at this point in time. So moving right along, we can't have one of these meetings though without talking about PERS. Now, however, PERS has gone from an employer standpoint, PERS has gone in a good direction. This is just an historical slide with regards to the actuarial value of PERS. Obviously, what you want is a system to be fully funded at 100%. Before the Great Recession, or the first Great Recession, and certainly before the second recession, we'd achieved that. But we've been struggling ever since. There was an uptick in 2019. I'll talk about that a little bit later. That was primarily a result of some work done on through legislation. So I don't have a slide on it, but PERS can only pay for what it's contractually obligated to pay through three mechanisms. One of them is employee contributions, employer contributions, and rate of return, so investment return. Employee contributions, for the most part, are set to 6%. Rate of return is whatever the rate of return is going to be. So when you have three variables and you don't have control over two of them, which one do you have control over? That's the third one. So it's always going to be the employer contribution that is either going to go up or down based on whatever the system needs in order to fund itself. So currently the assumed rate of return is 7.2% annually. That's what the investment fund assumes it will return in order to pay off needed expenditures. The rate of return in 2018 was 0.56%. The rate of return in 2019 was 13.56, a two-year average of 7.06. That's actually lower than the 7.2. That puts us in an imbalance. And normally our rates would then therefore be going up, which is what they were projected to do prior to Senate Bill 1049. We talked about that before. Senate Bill 1049 did a couple of things. One, it did pull some additional funds out from employees. Some of the contributions that employees make are now being utilized for the larger fund, the payments for retirees. But primarily what Senate Bill 1049 did was it essentially refinanced the mortgage and made it over a greater number of years. So what you do when you refinance the mortgage and take that 20-year mortgage and make it a 30-year mortgage, you're able to reduce the monthly payments, but you're also going to overall incur additional cost because you're going to be paying more in interest. But they took the short-term gain over the long-term pain. And so it did indeed reduce rates. As you can see here, going forward, because Senate Bill 11, the legislative fixes have been done, we don't anticipate any further legislative fixes. So we're going to be, it's going to be the rate of return and employer contributions that we have to look at. And the rate of return for 2020 through September has been 0.14%. Now, our next PERS rate adjustment will be based off of the full calendar year of 2020 and the full calendar year of 2021. Okay. So again, because of Senate Bill 1049, we did see a reduction, or we will see a reduction in July of 2021. Excluding our bond debt, this is just the amount that we actually pay PERS, we will see a reduction from 19.3% to 16.4%. Savings of roughly $1 million. However, because our funding is based off of what the state thinks we need, partially off of what the state thinks we need, the state will assume those savings system-wide when coming up with roll-up needs, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I want to talk about ADM weighted. We usually talk about enrollment, but because enrollment has shifted so drastically this year, especially going to our online program, I want to take a step back and not look at enrollment in our bricks and mortar, but look at everything that comes into being as how the district is paid out of the state school fund. Clearly, the lion's share of that comes from enrollment. Now, it's enrollment in our bricks and mortar, that's enrollment in our online program. That's just a student that is enrolled in our district. We receive additional weighting for our English as a second language students or English language learning students. We receive extra weighting for parent and pregnant students. Students in an IEP, that's special education. Students in poverty, that's not done on a student by student basis. The state looks at community poverty rates, and that's how they calculate what we should be receiving in that additional weight. Foster care, and then we don't have many postgraduate scholars, but for those that we do, they're actually a 0.75 weighting. So that's why it says minus 0.25. We receive 75% of the state school fund allocation per student for a postgraduate scholar. Those are fifth year seniors that we continue to work with, but they're spending their time at LBCC, and we essentially pay LBCC tuition and books. So looking at average daily membership weighted, I'm taking you back to 2010, 2011, and you can see the nice climbing the mountain, and then we had some years of decline. And then between 1819 and 1920, we saw a subtle growth, and we had projected the dotted line, there at the end, the orange, at least on my screen is orange. We had projected a slight increase again going from 1920 to 2021. The blue line is what actually happened to this year. A precipitous drop of 411 students. It's actually 411 students. That delta is between the number of students we had last year, so the solid red line, and the number of students that we have. That is a huge issue for us for any number of reasons. Clearly, we're concerned about those students and their education and where they are and what kind of education they're receiving. It also translates into a financial concern. We're being paid this year off of that kind of rust colored line. So you're always paid off of the higher of the current year or the prior year. So we're being paid off of that rust colored line. So we only had a small hit from a revenue standpoint for this year, despite the precipitous drop of enrollment. However, next year, we're going to be paid off of either what we see in enrollment for next year or what we see in enrollment for this year. So if we're going to see a reduction in revenue if we don't get back to that rust line. We are significantly down in 2021. I would say that the state is significantly down. This is not a Greater Albany phenomenon. This is a statewide phenomenon. I think it's a nationwide phenomenon. Students may be going homeschool, students going to private school, potentially parents holding their students back from kindergarten and will enroll them a year later. When we look at, and using kindergarten as an example, when we look at kindergarten for 2021, we only saw 75% of the kindergartners that we'd anticipated. Now that's whether they're bricks and mortar or online. We only saw 75%. We're 170 students down just in kindergarten. So with all of that as a fun backdrop, I'll now take an attempt to do a financial forecast. First, we want to look at Oregon net general fund revenues, because we all know it's been in the news that they're projected to take a significant hit as a result of the recession that was generated from COVID. I don't know if it's the COVID. So the first thing that you see here, initially there was a belief that the state general fund would be hit in this fiscal year, or this biennium, excuse me, the 1921 biennium. This chart shows that was later modified, that they actually don't anticipate a reduction in revenues for this fiscal year. Well, you can see that dashed line on the bottom. The dashed line on the bottom is where they thought we were going to be back in June, and where September, and it didn't change much today, where they believe that we're going to be now. So primarily because of the infusion of federal dollars into our economy, the state general fund is being held fairly harmless for 1921. But there are going to be ramifications going forward. And so while it's not as bad as it looked like in the June 20 forecast with that dashed light blue line, you still see a significant gap between the March forecast, the pre-COVID forecast, and where they are now. Again, a significant gap, and that gap continues on because essentially you end up with the same slope, but lower on the graph. That obviously creates problems for statewide in order to maintain existing programs. So let's talk a little bit about the 21-23 State General Fund. The State General Fund, admittedly, this was off of the September forecast. I didn't see that it changed much. They had a forecast that came out this morning. I didn't see that it changed much. The 21-23 State General Fund forecast only showed an increase of $200 million over 1921 expenditures. That's off of an $19 billion fund. Clearly, if you're going to experience any kind of cost increases with staff, etc., the $200 million is not going to cover it. CSL is current service level. So that's the estimate of what you're doing now, what it's going to cost in the next biennium. So the state looks at everything that's going on in the 1921, all the programs, what's that going to cost moving forward? What they're looking at is that in order to meet, they're going to have a 3 to 5% reduction, or the CSL is 3 to 5% higher than what's available in anticipated resources. So that's better, perhaps. I mean, the silver lining, I guess, is that it's not as bad as what it was projected to be a few months ago, but it's still a real problem. The other problem that we're facing is that the state school fund in 1921 was 19, that'd be great. How about $9 billion? Currently, the state is saying that the current service level for K-12 education for 21-23 is $9 billion. Now, part of the fact that you don't see an increase there is because they're assuming savings within the system from PERS. At the same time, however, our partners at COSA and OSBA say that is not a logical or reasonable, nor is it mathematically sound. So there's going to be a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion. The first thing that we always look for every year is the governor's budget. That will come out next month. That's the kind of the starting place to have the conversation about the state school fund. At this point, I don't think anybody knows where the governor is going to put that, but that's the first thing we'll look at. Is the governor going with what she's being told by the Department of Administrative Services, that $9 billion is sufficient, which it is not, by the way, or is she going to come in with a higher number? All of this, by the way, does not take into account any of the reserves that the state has. The state is, fortunately, has some fairly decent reserves, both the Education Stability Fund as well as the Rainy Day Fund. So there are resources that they could tap in order to improve some of these numbers. But again, that's a legislative decision. So looking at fund balance, obviously, anytime revenues are greater than expenditures, your fund balance goes up. Anytime expenditures are greater than revenues, fund balances go down. We have, for the last few years, we've had budgets that have been based off of the assumption that they would pull from fund balance in order to fund the programs that were built into those budgets. If we go forward to June 30 of 2020, we had estimated when we were here last time that we would have it would go down to $8.9 million. That number is going to be about 11.15 million, about what was slightly higher than what was in the budget. And it's an unaudited number at this point. The WS stands for work share. The primary difference between those two numbers is that in May and June of last fiscal year, this current calendar year, but last fiscal year, the school district participated in a work share program with the Oregon Employment Department, wherein employees were furloughed a couple of days a week. And because of the federal programs that were available, they were able to be held harmless. And we realized the savings from those furloughs, and those savings were roughly $2 million. So the primary driver in us seeing those savings was as a result of work share, which is why we're estimating that we're going to be at 11.15, slightly higher actually than the June 30 number, as opposed to the 8.9 number that had been previously estimated. We had budgeted that we were going to drop to right around, if we spent everything that was budgeted in the 2021 budget, in the adopted budget. If we spent everything that was allocated to be spent, we would have ended up at right around $8 million. At this point, as we look at what we're seeing in the way of expenditures and revenues for this year, we're slightly down in revenues. Again, for a couple of reasons. We had a slight amount because we were overestimated. We anticipated a slight increase in students. Some of the other things has to do with a significant decrease in what we anticipated we would see in administrative indirect cost for grants, because the SIA grant came in much lower than what we'd anticipated. But at any rate, there was a slight decrease in revenue. So what we're seeing here are under expenditures and savings and expenditures, under expending, excuse me. This is really hard to do when you're not here in front of me. So a heckle every now and then from Jennifer Ward would probably help here. But so we're looking at the expenditures. It's really hard to anticipate those, because I don't know whether or not we're going to stay in a comprehensive distance learning environment, whether we're going to be able to, if the metrics will allow us to move to a hybrid. What's that going to do to our expenditures? We've been able to take advantage of the federal funding that has come our way to deal with some of the extraordinary expenses that we've incurred this year. And so at this point, we're anticipating that we will be able to underspend the budget by a fairly significant amount in order to cause that ending fund balance to be higher than what we had projected it to be. That said, I think I have one more slide here. Yes, so we have forecast assumptions. This one's the one that gives me the most heartache. When you're looking at what drives our fund balance, what drives our ability to be up or down, it's the state school fund. And again, I talked to you before that there was essentially a 0% increase in the current service level assumption. I've been playing the game long enough. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think it's mathematically correct, nor do I think it's realistic as far as what the legislature and the governor are ultimately going to do. I hope I'm still being conservative by saying a 2% increase. A 2% increase doesn't cover our cost increases, but looking at a 2% increase for 21-23, And 8%, again, that doesn't do enough to make up for the problems that the 2% is creating. But assuming an 8% increase in 23-25 for the state school fund. COLA's 2% annually. The PERS, those are percentage points, not a percentage. So I am looking at the overall 2.84 percentage point decrease for 21-23. That's good news. But as I talked to you before, what was it, 0.14% return on investment through September. So that's not looking good. And so the tea leaves say that we will see an increase in 23-25. I've included a 2 percentage point increase for 23-25. I hope the investments turn around. I hope that doesn't happen, but that's what's built into the assumption. 4% insurance cost, etc. What I had to do though for enrollment is I had to assume flat enrollment growth. Now, I'm sorry, that's misleading in the way that it's included in this graph. It's not a graph, in this chart. And that is, I'm saying flat as for last year, that we return to last year's numbers next year. The difficulty with not making that assumption is it obviously blows a hole in revenues, but it doesn't take into account whatever we would be doing with staff, because if you have fewer students, you'll need fewer staff. So for purposes of looking into the future, I'm assuming that those students come back. Not that we have any growth over last year, but that we just return to the last year's level. And so that's the enrollment assumption. So with those assumptions, this is what I'm looking at. You can see that if you look at the blue, which is the ending fund balance, if it is a solid line, that's actual. If it's a dashed line, that's projected, and that's across the board for all of the numbers. We have been able to be flat in 17, 18, 18, 19, and then 19, 20. Again, part of that is just how we've ended the years. Work share, we've been able to dodge kind of a bullet with regards to the ending fund balance going down as it had previously been projected. But going forward, without changes, because we have a systemic imbalance within the budget, that's why you see the ending fund balance going down. If you look at the dashed red and the dashed green, the problem that we have is even with the PERS savings, we have costs that are going up, and we have revenue that declines. Now, I thought you said it was a 2% increase, Russ. Well, I did, and that's actually built in. I'm also assuming that they'll pay us on a 49%, 51% split between the 2 years of the biennium. And with a 2% overall increase, when you then divide that 49, 51, we would actually still receive fewer dollars per student next year than we did this year. So that still shows that even with a 2% growth in the state school fund, we still see a decline in revenue, and that's what's killing us. We can't have business as usual on the expenditures if the state is unable to fund us adequately on the state school fund side. I will leave it there just for a moment. After the meeting, we'll send this PDF out, so you don't have to be taking. I should have said this to begin with. You don't have to be taking screenshots or have your camera out or what have you. We'll go ahead and send this out when we're done. I'll stop. I'm going to stop there. Well, I'm going to stop there because I'm at the end, but I'm also just going to stop there. There was a slide I had intended to include, and that is the Student Success Act. Where the budget was built in 2021 on over $7 million coming to our district for the Student Success Act. We ended up seeing just over $2 million, $2.4 million in the Student Success Act. That didn't hit the general fund, but it also obviously didn't allow us to do things that we wanted to do as a district. That Student Success Act, as of this morning, was projected to be twice so the 21-22 was projected to be twice the 2021 number. So still not getting up to that 7 million number that we previously been estimated for us, but getting closer to $5 million for SIA for 21-22. And with that, I am done talking to my screen and not seeing anybody. And so I'm going to stop sharing so I can see people's faces again. Oh, you're all there and you're all awake. Good.
So Russ, I had a quick question. You mentioned that the student success funds only came in at 2 million versus the 7 million. I guess what was the difference between that? Was it just that the methodology was different, that we didn't receive as many grants as we anticipated?
It was purely related to the COVID recession.
Okay.
The Student Success Act is it has a dedicated funding stream, and it is the value-added tax. It's not a value-added tax. They call it something else. It's essentially a value-added tax that the legislature implemented.
Corporate activity tax, right?
It's an activity tax. I just can't remember what the
I call it
corporate.
Corporate. Thank you. It's the corporate activity tax. That is the funding source for the SIA or SSA. And so it's not that necessarily that money got pulled out of that. It's just that with the slowdown, the anticipated amount of money coming from the corporate activity tax was much less than what was anticipated. They're projecting that's going to rebound next year, not to the pre-recession, not to the pre-COVID recession levels, but that it will rebound next year. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. All right. Other questions for Russ? Michael.
Yeah. In terms of enrollment, so kids don't show up this time in because of COVID, but that's not, I'm assuming that's not a like you mentioned, it's not an Albany centric issue, that's a statewide issue. How does that affect the state school fund if I can imagine maybe a district did well and happened to get a lot of students, but I would assume that student districts throughout the state are seeing a downturn. If we're all seeing a downturn, wouldn't that kind of even things out?
Your audio is tough, Director Thompson, but I believe I understand the question. And yes, it's complicated, meaning the state school fund, once it's established by the state legislature, it's essentially a fixed pie. And then you're at the mercy of however many different ways the pie gets sliced. It is based off of an assumption, an estimate from ODE as far as how many students or ADMW there is throughout the state. So if there are fewer students, fewer ADMW, then everybody's slice gets a little larger. If there are more students than what was projected, then everybody's slice gets a little bit smaller. So unless the legislature takes some sort of action, yes, this fiscal year, everybody's slice is going to get a little bit larger. They haven't made any assumptions for that yet, by the way. So it is possible that we could see some additional dollars this year if they rebalance the fund to take into account the lower ADMW, and the legislature doesn't take some sort of action and say, well, you didn't need all of that money because you didn't have the kids, so we're going to pull some of it back. There hasn't been any talk of that, but they could do anything. They're talking about a special session, anything can happen. But yes, as the way things normally play out, if there are fewer students statewide, we should see a little bit more money per student because of that. The same would hold true next year if we're in the same boat as everybody else, proportionally speaking. I hope I answered your question, Michael, even though I only heard about 2 out of every 3 words.
I think that was a thumbs up from Michael as opposed to I had one more question. Okay.
Okay.
I had one more question, Director Allen. I mean, I realize that there's about 12 different things that are moving here. One of which is the enrollment, which I assume will hopefully come back. I don't know if there's any state or national conversations about if we're expecting to see all of that, if there's a potential we actually might see more than that. I realize we have to make a whole lot of assumptions to get to just assuming that we're going to have the 470 come back when school is in session. But I mean, is there any way to know that if in fact it's going to come back at 95% of what it was? And actually, would that be where we're at right now with the 471 that we've lost? You mentioned that a lot of that's in kindergarten. I assume that if kindergarten is in person, that hopefully those 170 plus whatever would have been in coming into kindergarten would all show up. But I mean, is there any way to know beyond just kind of what you've assumed in this budget where that's going to be?
You ask one of the most critical questions that there can be, and that is, given the fact that 2020 shattered everybody's crystal ball, what does enrollment look like for next year? What is going to happen? The one thing that's easy to do is I can move forward all of the students that are there now, and move them forward as far as moving them forward to grade. We can assume that kids are going to come back from AOL, Albany Online. But as far as the ones that actually left our system, either taking a gap year, if you will, or homeschooling or private school, I don't have an answer to your question at this point. Nor have I seen anything, nor have I seen any studies as far as looking at it from a system-wide standpoint. I do know that prior to COVID, the enrollment forecast that we had, and these are from a demographer that we had paid, it showed that we were going to be having some growth. So pre-COVID, things were moving up. I mean, we have housing that's going in the district. So I guess I'm cautiously optimistic, very cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to at least get back to last year's number. Because if we get back to last year's number, that's still lower than what we thought last year we would be next year, if that makes sense. So there's still a little bit of wiggle room there. If we are able to be fully, I mean, if the vaccine comes and we are able to have education as normal in the fall, I'm very cautiously optimistic that we'll at least be able to see last year's number.
And I'll add to that a little bit. Of course, with the Albany Online, we're not recouping anything because those students are still our students that we're already collecting resources for. But where we look at homeschooling, so our homeschooling numbers have more than doubled this year. And we anticipate that a number of those students will come back next year, but we actually anticipate that a number of those students will come back this year once we reopen into hybrid. So once we have more in-person learning happening. So part of the challenge with what Director Allen is building is he needs to build on the assumption that they're gone for the year, and yet we don't. So we'll know more as a budget committee as we progress. Simply because like in 2 days, we're sending a survey home to all of our K-5 parents saying, hey, are you going to want to do hybrid? The other piece to that is kindergarten. We believe, and so this is superintendents across the state believe that we are going to see this odd wave of kinder next year where folks will have chosen to keep their child home from school this year and will have basically twice as many numbers, or 40%, 80% as many numbers of kinders next year. And it'll be mixed with kids who are 5 and 6 in kinder because they'll have never had kinder. So those are the two kind of bigger pieces that I think we could see a jump from. I'm not sure we'll recoup, nor would I with private schools. I'm not sure what that would look like, but certainly I think with homeschooling and with the kinder variants, we'll see a change.
Eric.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And Russ, I do miss Ashley kind of kicking in once in a while at you too. So we do lose a little bit of the with Zoom. Superintendent Goff, have you heard anything from OSBA or COSA about lobbying to raise that 11% for the IEP? I think a lot of schools are over that 11%, and we just take it as it is. But I haven't heard any lobbying for that.
No, no. So what you're talking about is the threshold for reimbursement for the percentage of students who are on an IEP. And no, we haven't had any conversations around that.
Because that's been an issue for quite a few years. But
Eric, it does get discussed. I don't know anything on the horizon, but it certainly gets discussed pretty much every biennium. We do receive some additional money for those students over the 11%, but it's not anything close to full weight.
Yeah. And then when it comes to charter schools, we only release like 3% of our student populations when they want to transfer to a charter school, correct? And then the scary thing about that was, this past November, a lot of new representatives running for state representative again. And that came up a lot about being able to choose where your student goes to. So that might just be something to keep on the forefront of watching that legislation if it changes from that 3%. Those were just my couple notes from your meeting. Thank you, Russ.
I would just add to that, Eric, that the 3% cap is for online charter schools. And while I respect parents' desires to go where they want to go, we offer an online program. So we offer the same thing that online charter school would be offering. And in many cases, it's the exact same curriculum that other online charter school would be providing.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think there's just some misleading information, but I think we've all been asked like, hey, how come my student can't transfer out?
Okay, Jake.
So when Portland State does its estimations on population, do they give you anything of school age kids? I know we just got ours for Millersburg today, and that's what kind of I thought about that. Like Millersburg has increased about 10% since last year, but it was expected with the number of homes we had coming in. And I'm guessing you're using some of those information to project students.
I haven't. To be perfectly frank, I've never seen anything specific coming out of Portland State for us that pertains to us. Mm-hmm. Portland State is one of the demographer options that school districts said that some school districts use in the state. So they pay money to Portland State to get the money or to get the enrollment projections. So I haven't seen anything that's publicly available from Portland State that would help us in that regard. And at this point, we have not contracted with a demographer. Again, I'm not sure what a demographer would be able to do. They can certainly look at the number of housing starts and housing completions and dwell yield, and they can do that sort of thing. But I'm not sure as we look forward that I don't know how much value that they can actually add at this point in time.
So it's not like people are moving out of the district. It's more of the options of people choosing. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
Absolutely not. We do. It's not that we have a declining base of school-aged children in the district.
Yeah. Okay.
And just giving that a quick look, Jake, for Lynn County, it's about a 0.6% estimate from Portland State and what they released today of an increase. So, that's good, but we don't have the breakdown by age of.
Okay.
Russ, you had on, I think the next to the last slide showed that reserve amount going down below the 5% threshold. And I think that it looked like it had done that in the 21-22 year. Did I read that correctly?
It did drop below. This is assuming that we made no changes on the expenditure side of the house. It did drop
Okay.
slightly below that 5% in the 21-22 year. So the answer to the question you haven't asked, one, we have to get a good understanding of the governor's budget and what the legislature is going to do with regards to financing. And we as a district have to look at the expenditure side and see what can be done in order to bring those into better alignment.
Okay. I was, and maybe I misinterpreted a slide that was much earlier in your slide deck where it had the estimated, and I think you said the estimated reserve amount at $8 million, but it was actually going to be closer to 9.8. But maybe I misunderstood what that number was reflecting.
The 9.2, that was at the end of 2021.
Okay.
So
it really makes it dives down pretty good then the following year, it sounds
Yes.
like.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Other questions for Director Allen?
You don't need to
All
say
right.
going once, going twice. You can just stop right there.
Right. The next thing on the agenda was Superintendent Goff with a district focus. So I will turn it over to you.
Superintendent Goff and Chris, we have the ability now to look at the calendar. I don't know if you want to do that now or if you want to do that after Superintendent Goff's comment.
If we have it now, yeah, let's go ahead and take a quick look at it, if that's okay with you, Superintendent Goff. Okay.
So it's going to be in two places. Jen's going to be sharing it on the screen, and it's also in your inboxes. So if you wanted to go to your email, you can find it there. But Jen's also going to go ahead and throw it up on the screen so you can look at the calendar. If you could make it a little bit bigger, Jen. Probably, there you go.
Okay.
So you're sitting on November 18th. That would be today. What we're looking at in kind of a typical arrangement, we're starting a little later than we might otherwise start. But it's a legislative session and we tried to build in as much time as we reasonably could. But the first budget committee meeting would be April 28th, where the superintendent would provide her budget message for the superintendent recommended budget. And then we would have a scheduled budget meeting on May 12th. And then we've typically been able to approve the budget in 2 meetings. If the committee needed a third meeting, we have a spot available for it on May 26th. And then the other 2 dates are for the school board. So this, we do like whether it be by motion or whether it be by acclamation, we would like the budget committee to embrace the calendar.
Okay. So I'm happy to embrace it with a motion. If someone would like to, you don't have to make a motion to embrace it, just a motion to accept the budget calendar unless someone has a suggestion for different dates, but this is pretty consistent with our calendars in the past. So
I'll make a motion.
Do I have a motion to approve that
motion to approve?
Very good. Is there a second?
I'll second.
I have Heather as the second. All right. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Great. Thank you, Jennifer, for getting that up.
Yes, and thank you for being flexible on that agenda item.
You bet. All right, Superintendent Goff.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to Director Allen for, doing the best he can to project what money will look like at the end of this year and then in future years to come. It's really a challenging situation for us right now, given that we've never been here before. I think it's important to note that as we look at expenditures, one of the places that we are reviewing is where we are in our expenses to date on staffing. And if we look and exclude typical costs such as substitutes and are just looking at staffing overall, and basically which teachers and education assistants and transportation drivers are working and how much is that costing us, we are still underspending what we had projected by a sizable amount. And by sizable, I mean when we look at all of the 100 and 200 codes, which are the people codes, it's over $4 million of underspending. So part of what is really challenging with what Russ is doing is he's needing to anticipate, as we come back into a hybrid model, where, in person, where might then some of those expenditures where we haven't spent any money so far end up being, and at what amount. And I think as every good financial person does, I think he's been conservative in the modeling. I've even pushed him and he's adjusted it to be less so. And yet, I could push him harder, and he has lots of cushion to be even less so. So it is a really dark picture, and there, I don't. It's not quite as dark as it seems, though. A serious picture for us to be considering. So I say that to you only to say that when we come before you in April, you may hear some differences that make you kind of step back and go, well, wait a minute, that feels pretty different than where we were in November. And I just want you to know that April's a long ways away from November, and we shall see what comes about, which kind of brings me then to what our focus needs to be in. And one of our focus areas as a district needs to be paying attention to where we're investing our dollars, where we're spending our dollars, and how we are taking care of our ability to continue to operate in the black rather than moving into the red as a district. And we've been doing a lot of systems work around that, but part of our ongoing work is going to be continuing to focus in those areas. I think we are looking at some of the grants, such as the SIA grant, the Student Investment Act grant that Russ was talking about earlier, and seeing where we may be able to make investments that we wouldn't be able to make given the general fund in the shape that it is. So it's really important for us to, as we look future forward, and we have these conversations about where I think that we should be and will be heading, that part of how we're going to make that happen, actually a lot of how we're going to make that happen, is not actually going to be through the general fund that you're going to approve, because of where we are in general fund. So where we're going to see the opportunity to do investments is largely going to be away from general fund, and what we're going to be doing in the general fund is looking at where we can save, if that makes sense. An example will be this. So one of the areas that we as a district need to come to a reckoning on is the fact that we do not have enough mental health professionals within our system. The lack of K-5 counselors was problematic at this time last year, and a huge area of focus across our entire stakeholder community for a need to improve. We needed more K-12 counselors, mental health workers to support our kids and their success. Now, it's exacerbated, just as it is in your own families, right? So we know that adults and kids alike are really suffering from the trauma that this pandemic has, that we're all walking through together, but all in our own personal way. And the lack of access for our students to mental health professionals and people who have had training around supporting young people through the developmental stages and through trauma and grief, the lack of our ability to do that is really extremely concerning to me. And so what you'll see is probably not investment by the general fund proposed to you in April and May in those very professionals that I'm talking about. What we'll do is look at that doubling the SIA dollars that we're anticipating having, and that being where we put those resources. So part of what's hard about this conversation is, as I talk to you about the direction that we're going, I fear it may feel a bit frustrating to you as we look at the budget in late spring, to really see the pathway toward that investment, because the investment itself is going to be difficult. We also, as a community, talked a lot about equity, and that was for special education students, like Eric, Director Aganaga was referencing. It's regarding our other historically underserved groups that we serve, students who are in lower socioeconomic groups, students who are racially diverse, students who speak a language other than English as their first language. These are students that typically and historically have not been served well in public schools in the model of teaching and learning that we've had. And Albany is no exception to that. So that will continue to be an area for us to be looking at. How are we, where we can reorganize, how do we reorganize to better support those students? And I'll talk about that reorganization as I talk about the third priority, which is excellence in learning. So how are we helping our students to think critically and engage in meaningful dialogue with each other about content and about issues, and really delving into higher order thinking skills for all of our students. Those three big areas are where we need to be heading together. And we're already heading there even during the pandemic, which is awesome news. And actually, there are benefits that are going to come from this pandemic that we can continue to use in the future. So, and I'll give examples on each of those areas. So, as we look at excellence in teaching and learning and reaching all students, part of what we are finding is we are learning some key things through distance learning that are made available by the tools that we're using, or by the flexibility of the day for students and their families that are advantageous to some of our kids. I was just meeting with teachers today, and I met with the high school teachers in a forum and the middle school teachers in the forum as well. And one of the things that the high school teachers talked about was the surprising asset that is the chat that we have here on the right, that we all have up on the right hand of our screen, right, in Zoom. They are finding that they have many students who would not engage verbally in class, that they never heard a word from in person in class, and have been stunned to learn that now they are seeing how kids think, because they are comfortable typing into the chat, because no one can hear them. The teacher can give a response or other kids can give a response, but it allows a different type of engagement for students for whom the anxiety or just simply not wanting to be the center of attention for whatever reason has been keeping them from doing. And so the high school teachers are saying, how do we keep that when we go back in person at semester? What are the strategies that we're going to use to continue to have that safe space for students so that we continue to know what they know and what they're learning? That's really important for us to know, because it means that some of the kids we weren't reaching well before, we are going to be able to reach differently. And so when I think about where we're heading is a different place than fall of 2019. I don't think school will ever look like fall of 2019 again. If it does look exactly like fall of 2019, then we as educators haven't taken out of this experience what we need to take away from the experience to meet the needs of more students. The other piece that has been really important for our staff as they have been engaging is that idea of flexibility. And what they are finding is that for some of our families, the flexibility of being able to be on during certain times of the day, to be engaged during certain times of the day with direct instruction, but not a whole 7-hour day in a row has been really beneficial. And so what does that look like then for our schools when we go back in person? Do we still have options for a distance learning similar to what we've been doing now for some of our kids? If so, what are the costs associated with that? Because the reason we have found so much savings is that in distance learning, when you have kids in distance learning all the time, there are a few things that are happening. One is we're hardly ever hiring subs. No one, because people are at home already. So if they don't feel good, they're just, teaching their kids from their couch. Like I'm sitting in a comfortable chair downstairs right now, right? So we're not seeing that cost. The other thing that we see is changes simply in the way that students are engaging with each other and needing supports or not needing supports, and sometimes those supports are more expensive. We have this odd cost savings, right, with transportation, where we're not transporting kids, but it's very minimal for us because we've kept our drivers. Our goal has been not to lose our drivers, because when kids come back to the building, we can't be trying to rehire a bunch of drivers because they won't be out there anymore. So I'm kind of talking in around a bunch of different issues, but I want you to understand the complexity about where we're headed. We as superintendents across the state and really across the nation are talking about really going into this unknown world of teaching and learning, which will in large part look very similar to what happened in fall, where schooling was in 2019, but will also look different in serious aspects. And some of those differences may in fact end up saving resources, which would be helpful for us there. And so it's hard. I don't have a 40-minute talk to give about where we're going, because we're really headed the same place we had hoped to be heading in February of last year when our strategic planning team last met, which was February. And during that meeting, what I did was talk to the team about here's our work from March through June, so that in August we are good to go with all of our goals and we're all set. And that was it. We didn't meet again, right? So we have to pick that work back up. That strategic planning team needs to pick the work back up around our goals. They will be in those 3 areas that I talked about tonight, really around equity, around mental health, and around educational excellence. And that includes engagement with families. We have felt, we received a lot of feedback during our stakeholder work last year that we had a long ways to go in how we're engaging families. And then when you disaggregate that, certain families were much less engaged than others. And you could disaggregate it by grade level. You could disaggregate it by race. You could disaggregate it by language or special education. And pretty much there were always people who were better connected than others. We've learned a lot during this pandemic about that. I mean, we've certainly learned about how to over communicate as well, but we are trying new strategies than what we've used before. A takeaway is we're doing a lot of parent forums. I don't think I'll ever get away from those parent forums. And they have staff costs associated with it, but but we get a lot more bang for that buck than we've ever had before. So there's going to be a lot different about where we are for next year. And as we look at the budget, our goal is going to need to be over the next few months for our staff team to think about what can we use to our advantage budgetarily as we move forward into this new framework, and to also be relentless about taking through what is working in the new framework. And we're talking about that with ODE as well. I met with a couple representatives from ODE who've actually been working on distance learning in particular, and were asking us about our work. And when they asked what they could do, I just said, you need to make the space for school to not look exactly the same as it has, because we know school didn't work well for 10, 20, 30% of kids, depending on grade level and background. And we need to do a better job. And so we need to be able to walk away from what we're doing right now and learn from that. We know that for the kids who engage in comprehensive distance learning, now not Albany Online, because that's a more expensive way for us to run distance learning. It costs us a lot. But for the kids who engage in comprehensive distance learning, as we are running it right now, it is a less expensive model. Even if teachers are teaching the same number of kids. Where we're finding savings are in places related to, in addition to staffing, but related to paper and all the things that get used when you're inside a school that aren't being used right now. You also see a bunch of savings like that. But long term, as we get better at distance learning, I think we will probably never go back to where we don't have both a distance learning program where we have teachers assigned to this model of learning, and teachers in the regular brick and mortar school. Most of our kids will remain in brick and mortar. Most of our teachers will remain in brick and mortar, but we'll continue to do this, and this will be a cost savings thread for us as we move forward. So questions about that direction. And
Jennifer.
Thanks, Melissa. I don't particularly have questions, maybe just things that I would add along those thoughts. I mean, in the conversations that I've had with parents and with the community since COVID hit, that is one of the points that I've made is when we do go back, don't expect it to look the same. And that means not just when we go back to a hybrid, which of course is not the same as what we had pre-COVID, but when we're able to be back in school full time, back in brick and mortar schools full time, it will not look the same. It should not look the same because of the lessons that we've learned. And to also point out that we have achieved things in this model that we have wanted for a long time that we hadn't been able to achieve. For example, vertical alignment or alignment with our high schools, right? Overall smaller class sizes. And also one that we're really appreciating in my household is a later start for our teenagers, and they're getting more sleep. And I actually read a national study recently that showed that is across the board. And that actually really relates to mental health too, because if our kids aren't sleep deprived, especially our teenagers, like they're feeling better and they have the coping mechanisms for the the difficulties that they may encounter in their day, whether it's COVID or not. So those are things that we haven't necessarily discovered through COVID, things that we knew we wanted beforehand, that I hope that we'll be able to retain as we move on as well.
And I would add to that the one-to-one technology access now for every teacher and every student. So all of our kids and all of our teachers now have access to technology, and in most cases, operational functional internet, we were so far away from that reality prior to this year. So to flexibility, but also to when we see inequities, socioeconomic inequities, many of those show up in areas of technology. And so being able to have every kid go home with the same technology and feel confident that they have what their peer has at home, and be able to access that homework from home because we may have given them a hotspot in order to do so. Those are really big changes, and things that cost money and are being covered by the COVID related cost coverage. the purchases certainly were, and then some of the technology connections are as well. That those will be areas that we are going to need to be looking at how we continue.
So one of your goals would be to make like that if a child needs a hotspot, you would provide that even past COVID.
Yeah, that needs to be one of our goals. And so to make that happen, we are going to need to find where those dollars exist within the budget, or could be found.
Which most likely we could find grants for that kind of thing, right? Like grants for technology are pretty, common is not the word, but I know that people like to invest in that area.
Superintendent Goff, you mentioned the strategic plan group that apparently had met last in February. Did their work actually conclude in February, or was that just the last time they were able to meet?
No, that was the last time they were able to meet. And since that time, things have been so chaotic that I have not intentionally brought them back together this year so far, because of how many unknowns we have and the real chaos that is in that is in our families and communities' personal lives, that pulling people together when we still don't have kids back at school is just, I think, too big of a hurdle. Once we get kids back in hybrid, and then that's when those invitations will go out for those folks to come back together and finish the work that was March to June last year. Will likely be March to June this year if we can get kids in school.
Okay. How much further, or I guess how much more work does that group have before you're sort of at a resting point or a direction on the strategic plan?
Yeah, they don't have too much more to do. So we just need to solidify the goals, and then really from that plan to the staff, and the staff from those goals build all of our work plans come out of those goals.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions for Superintendent Goff? All right. Any other discussion of information today? Okay. Did we have any comments from the public? I didn't think so, but I want to double check and see if anything had been submitted.
I certainly didn't see anything. Ms. Sullivan, did you receive anything from either directly or from Ms. Green relative to comments from the public?
No, nothing.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, how have the board meetings been working with public input, or has there been public attendance at the board meetings?
Well, there hasn't been public attendance. Jennifer, Director,
well,
you want to?
There has been a lot of public attendance. I mean.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I mean, way more than could fit in the boardroom.
No one's physically been there. I get that.
One of the directors could definitely speak to that, but it has been very different.
Faces on the screen. You're absolutely correct. There's a lot more people, eyes on the meeting than we've ever had before.
Okay.
I mean, that has just amazed me, frankly, the numbers of people that are tuning into our board meetings, which is really exciting. And as far as the other directors can chime in too, and I hope they will. So public comment, I think, has been measured. And when we were meeting in person, it was kind of, we had cycles. I mean, some meetings there was nothing, and some meetings there was quite a bit. We haven't gotten tons and tons. The way we've been working that is we just receive it by noon, and then usually Vice Chair Thompson reads them. They come in by email. So.
Okay. I asked that question just because I know one of the things we struggle with on this committee is getting public input. And I know it's a sort of be careful what you ask for kind of thing, but it's also, I don't know how many times I'm educating people about why the district spends funds the way they do. And no better way to do that than invite them to a budget committee meeting and seeing actually what goes into it and all the hard work. And it's really hard to throw rocks at something when you realize, oh my gosh, this is really hard to do. It's amazing the district does what they do. So I'm always trying to put the plug in there, and I realize I'm speaking to the choir, but as trying to get more people involved in this process, particularly the ones that directors might see out in the community that are always quick to point out when the district is making what they think is unwise investments. All right. So if there aren't any other questions or comments, I think we are ready to adjourn. Our next meeting will be April 28th. And it sounds like we will hopefully be recruiting another member to replace Will at that point. I also know that there may be another director on board at that point. I'm not sure where the board is in replacing Pat's position, but sounds like at least a couple more faces around this table virtually. Okay. All right. Thank you all. Good to see you.
Thank you.